So hi everyone. First of all, I want to thank you for joining us in this new webinar of the Legal Tech Global Legal Tech Hub. Today we are going to talk about one of the most critical aspects of our digital life and business, digital identity. We all know that digital identity is probably one of the most relevant challenges that we need to face as a part of the legal industry. Static solutions like logins and passwords aren't good enough to address this challenge. And digital identity based on dynamic solutions like biometric systems or mobile apps may be the solution that we have been looking for. So today we have the opportunity to learn a lot about digital identity with Joe Bloemendaal from MyTech Systems, okay? So MyTech Systems is a global leader in identity verification technology. MyTech is trusted by the world's largest banks for the Know Your Client onboarding and re-verification processes. Maybe you can later talk about this. Joe is the identity futurist at MyTech, working as an entrepreneur with a real passion for solving problems, designing strategies and solutions to help MyTech's client leverage the most out of their technologies. Joe joined MyTech after the acquisition of ID Checker, and he believes that the true potential of the internet will only be unlocked if we can trust someone online like we can trust someone offline. So thank you, Joe, for your time. And as the first question to introduce the discussion, I would like you to ask you, in your opinion, what are the current challenges of digital identity?
Yeah, thanks, Farhan, for the kind introduction, and obviously thanks for having my tech on your show. I completely agree that identity and digital identity is key. Also, obviously, in your world, and yeah. So, what's the challenge with digital identity? That's quite a broad question. So, there's a couple of things that jump to mind. Number one, the terminology is mixed up in many cases. I think in the legal world, that's not a good thing to have. So a lot should be done and is being done in webinars and seminars and white papers to get people aligned on what terminology is. Obviously, there's me with my physical identity. Then there's this concept of a digital twin, which is a translation of my identity into the digital world. And then you might have several virtual me's, and they might be translated into credentials. So getting that aligned is probably one of the very first things that can be done to face some of the challenges. The next one is that we don't really have a digital identity yet. Lots of people think we do, but we digitize a lot of what we perceive to be the source of an identity. And without a true digital identity, we get sort of all sorts of problems. We can see the fragmentation of data, the duplication of data. It sits everywhere and with everybody. And usually that translates into all sorts of issues around trust and accountability. And maybe, Fran, I'll unfold that a little bit later on if you want to. The other one that I was thinking of is that fraud with digital access and digital identity is on the rise. There's a lot we can talk about there, but it's certainly one of the challenges with the digital identity at the moment. And then when you think of not having a digital identity, but you're using digitized identities, now you're having challenges around how people can prove their identity. And you're in the world of MyTech, like you say, we're one of the leading companies in offering services that will allow people to capture a good image of an identity document and a biometric like a face and use that in a digital channel. But for both parties involved, the person, the individual, but also the relying party, as we call them, so the company that needs to know who I am or the person who wants to know who I am, there's friction in that channel because you need to bridge those gaps between physical and digital. And maybe a fourth one we could dive into, and I welcome any questions, by the way. Throughout the last 6-8 months, we've seen this increased dependency on digital channels, but also not just an increased dependency, but also very much a more diverse group going online. So my dear father, who's 74, who was online for fun sometimes, now he's online for very serious things like accessing governmental services, maybe for e-health, but also maybe he wants to get his groceries brought to his house, but he needs to know that the person at the door is not going to rob him instead of bring the groceries. So those are four things that I think that are making a little bit harder for us to work with the digital identity as it stands today. I can unfold some of the ideas I have around those ones. Not having a digital identity, to your point, what we still do have is usernames and passwords, and everybody's extremely tired of that. We need a solution there as well, like we need a solution for the initial creation of an identity. We need to make identity contextual. So that means that not using too much information in scenarios where that's not necessary. The most famous one used on talks like we do and other people that know a lot about identity is me ordering a bottle of wine online, which I do sometimes, but then having to show my complete passport, which doesn't make sense at all. All you need to be able to do is prove that you're over 18 or in another country over 21. So thinking of that what we really need is something that is private, that is portable, that is persistent, always has to be persistent, and then personal as well. So it's tied more to me than to the single databases that it usually will sit in.
So in MyTech, what's your the way you resolve this gap between the digital and the physical identity? You mentioned this. I saw in your website that you're using biometric technology, something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So what the traditional way of verifying an identity using database and knowledge-based authentication, we all know that a lot of that's broken, unfortunately, because that data has been stolen. There's breaches all the time and have been for a while, which means that they are less reliable. So moving to a world where you can actually use, like you say, an identity document, which is a very good source. In itself, it's portable, it's persistent and everything. The challenge is you're introducing friction in the channel because you need to bridge that. So MyTech has technology, very mature technology, to allow an end user, a consumer, to capture a good image of the identity document in the circumstances that they are in at that moment. Lots of light, little light, good camera, bad camera. And what we usually would like to see as a KPI is one-time success rate. So one image, you're done, you can move on. Then we bring that identity document image to MyTech, and then we verify it, which means that we can determine if it's genuine or it has been tampered with. But we also need to know that Joe is actually uploading his own document. And that's where biometrics really come into play, because with a selfie and liveness behind the selfie, absolutely critical, we can tie all of this together and we say, no, number one, we know the identity document is fine. Number two, Joe's uploaded his own document. And three, he was live at the moment when he onboarded himself or accessed services. And then moving a bit more down the customer journey, the biometric is critical for getting rid of, hopefully one day, username passwords, because we can use that biometric for access control, for authorization of transactions, step up, but also things like re-verification.
So in your opinion, just to finish with the technology, do you think that technology currently is mature enough to solve the problem? I mean, to resolve this gap? Or do you think that we need to go further with this?
Yeah, so we need to, at some point, start moving away from having to use passports, driver's license, ID cards in a digital context. We're not there yet. So so long we're still using them as our source of truth, as our trust anchor, then I think the technology with companies like MyTech is very mature. So we can get you to a very high level of assurance, something that a bank would require or an insurance company would require to be compliant and to prevent fraud within 1 or 2 minutes. So it's a pretty smooth and well thought through process, and it's developing as we move along. So sometimes, to some extent, we used to have to rely on completely sort of analog pictures being translated and then verified. But today, MyTech and we also offer NFC chip reading, for instance. So you can hold your mobile phone to your passport, and then we can read the chip on there. And obviously, that's quicker, more reliable, and also gives us a better picture to compare to the selfie. So in that sense, the technology has become very mature.
You mentioned mobile phones because you consider that mobile phones as a personal device is a piece, no, of a masterpiece. All of this, or what's your point of view in that?
Yes, absolutely. So the shift to mobile is undeniable. I know it varies from region to region. So in some countries, people might still be using laptops or web interfaces in a different way, but the majority of the people use their mobile phone. They have it in their range. Even now, I'm online with you guys. It's right here next to me, and we can use it, and we can start using it as a tool to capture an image, to get a selfie, and that's why I believe strongly that mobile is key to these developments.
Okay, so I would like to move from technology to another part of the digital identity, which is the legal framework. And let's talk a little bit about legal framework, regulations versus technology. And I have a couple of questions for you. The first is, what is the role of the European regulation? What's the role that the European regulation plays in the field of digital identity verification? Okay. And second is, will the same European regulators be influenced by the current pandemic situation? And this is a situation that facilitates implementation of new technologies?
Yeah. Okay. So, what is the role of the regulation, of the regulator, of the European Commission? It's an important role, and it's become more important the last couple of months. All of a sudden, so I think having a digital identity, once we get there, that is interoperable, that is key. So having sort of siloed solutions, like I have a Dutch identity, you have a Spanish identity, somebody else has their French identity, and not being able to cross the borders even digitally doesn't help. So in that sense, European regulation is key to drive innovation in the direction of compatibility. There's also some other really compelling figures that are important to know about. McKinsey had a report out that I had a glance over, and they said that having truly streamlined processes like you and I just talked about could save up to 110 billion hours of man work, because we're now doing that digitally. So translate that into dollars, mind-boggling, right? It could reduce onboarding costs, and onboarding is very much a use case that my type of technology is extremely important. We could reduce those costs by 90%. And in that same report, it says that 1.6 trillion annually globally could be saved doing that. But the one I really care about most is the fact that if we have truly a digital identity, something that the European Federation can put out there, we could easily see an uptick in GDP of somewhere between 1% and 3%. And we wouldn't have to get more people included, only 1 or 2% more people included into financial services would give us a jump like that. I mean, just to give you an idea, at the moment, there's 1.1 billion people who are excluded from anything digital because they don't have an identity or digital identity. So no access to voting, no access to e-health education, and that's a key problem. And that's where regulation, like the European regulation, plays a key role. The one I was thinking about when you just asked the question is the EIDAS. You're probably familiar with EIDAS legislation. That's quite unique, actually. It's what's now seen as a world-class sort of digital verification infrastructure, the pipeline that we have that we can now start building out technologies on. But it's mainly for, and only for at the moment, for public sector solutions. So me talking to my government. So we really need to get the private sectors to think about this and build out and pull this use of a digital identity into our day-to-day life. And I think that's where the other question you were asking, the intersection with technology, comes in. And EIDAS is successful, but it's varying from country to country. At the moment, there's 13, 14 member states, and the UK, they're sort of notified. Denmark's on the horizon, they're coming up. And this translates to sort of 65% of the European citizens and the population having access through qualified service trust providers to access digital services. So what it really also is saying that the sort of almost the other half of the European citizens don't yet. So there's countries that need to play catch up, Romania, Greece, that are working hard, no doubt, to get there, but they need to play some catch up. And this is EIDAS, the regulation is attracting some attention from outside of Europe. Similarly, for other types of legislation, GDPR, we could talk about that if you want to as well. And we can see regions far outside of Europe looking at this and saying, okay, so that's a pretty good way of putting this together. How could we adopt that in our region?
So in your opinion, that's the current situation, the pandemic situation. Do you think that it will accelerate the development of the regulation that you were mentioning? I mean, is something that you think that is going to accelerate?
Yes. Yeah.
Because probably now more than ever, digital identity is something that we need to have a solution.
Yes.
Because
yes. Yeah, absolutely. It's the fundamental key to everything. Key to the payments. It's key to access control, etc., etc. So yes, I think technology. I often get the question, what comes first, regulation or technology? To me, it's a ecosystem. So it's working together, and sometimes a little bit more bumps in the road, and sometimes a little bit more seamlessly. But I think getting people to a digital identity as soon as possible, given the situation that we're in now, has become sort of paramount, right? We can see that there's no way we can't do that. And you can see that the European Commission is setting out initiatives. They're calling 2020 to 2030 the digital decade. They're cranking up on the AML legislation, GDPR is being revised, etc., etc. So there's a lot happening, and they will be influenced because if it's an ecosystem, that means that both the technology companies, but also companies like banks and the governments need to work together. Everything's connected. It's a platform world now. And to your point, Farhan, which is definitely something that we can't forget, the privacy aspect of all of this is hit the public domain, which means that you and I and people that are not always working in this world understand that there's something to care about in the data you share online every day. So I really think it's the next frontier, and that's where the governments will be invited, at least, to follow suit and follow up. And sometimes it's driving. I think it's driving innovation. So if I think of PSD2, the Payment Service Directive, which is encouraging competition, the open banking stuff. At the heart of that sits strong customer authentication. You'll no doubt know about that, SCA. And at the heart of that sits identity verification again. And that's definitely driving more traditional worlds like banking to think about how they will fit into that ecosystem. But that's out there. And to your answer, the regulator is now probably going to have to think about what the next step is. Because if you think of the fact that the transactions now might not just sit within the banks, but the transactions will also sit with other parties within that open banking ecosystem, all of a sudden that has to also be regulated, has to be looked after. So you'll see. And then in some cases, and then I'll pause for a second, Farad, in some cases you can see that it's also, there's some instances where you could say, okay, there's room for improvement. If I think of some countries in Europe where for identity verification, still a video chat is necessary, I believe that technology, that even at MyTech, is sophisticated enough and has proven to be more robust and much more user-friendly. So that's where you can see the regulator might want to now look at the newer technology and go, okay, I think this is good. Let's move on. We can relax the requirement on the video because the other one is strong enough. But in most cases, the regulators are out there to normalize things that are already happening. See the things that are already make sense. So
okay, so we have been talking about technology and a lot about regulations. Let's move to business. And I would like to know, what's your vision for the business of the digital identity for the coming years, the current competitive landscape? Have the recent circumstances like COVID influencing that vision? What's the state of art, I mean, in terms of business?
Yeah. So thanks for asking that. That's a big one as well. So COVID is important because it's a challenging time, and we're going to be faced with some really fundamental questions around protecting sort of our public health, but also keeping the economy alive, right? That's feeling a bit like a trade-off where I think technology can help to answer some of those questions with tracing and informing. And that's where governments, going back to them for a sec, have the choice of, am I going to go into the surveillance type of modus, or am I going to equip my citizens with technology in many cases to support themselves and make sensible decisions. So looking out there, old structures are going to be reevaluated. You see that already happening. In just a good example is working from home was something of an exception up till about a year ago, and today it's quite normal. So are we going to take some of that into the new world? The society becomes a little bit more fluid, no touch. If you think about changes in payment, well, I mean, lots of people don't like physical money, cash anymore so much. So the physical world is the one that's changed a lot. And I think we're going to see that echo back into the digital world and vice versa. So the COVID is accelerating a lot of what I already expected to happen. And in essence, and you said it earlier today, Farhan, the digital identity is not so much a nice to have anymore. It's a must have. And people are understanding that we're not going to go back to the old, and we don't have to. There's technology that can allow us to do things through digital channels safely and conveniently as we could do through physical channels, or even better. But it does put pressure on the governments to move quicker. We're going to see that most companies are going to have to become very much a technology company. So a bank in 10 years from now is going to be more a technology company looking after our financial health than a sort of a money store place that looks after our financials. And that drive towards technology is a good thing, but also we need to keep our eye out on personal concerns, obviously around data storage, privacy, etc. So there's one thing. And I think in the future, we're going to be using more and more biometrics. You can like it or not. We need to find ways that that doesn't sort of translate us into a surveillance world, potentially.
Yeah.
But looking at it from the right side, it's definitely technology that is super important. Now, thinking of your, keeping your question in mind, there are some fundamental conversations going on in the world about, will we have digital governmental federated identities? Will Facebook or Google give me an identity? Will my bank give me an identity? Or will I have a complete self-sovereign identity that runs on a blockchain? I don't know. I have some ideas that I won't share. You go ahead, Fern.
We have a question for you later, but I can advance that someone is asking for decentralized identities. So maybe you have the opportunity to talk about self-sovereign identities later on.
Yeah, absolutely. It's important because the one thing that we definitely need is the fact that we can decide much more than today what data we share, how we share it, and where who has access to it from the other end, and why. So that's where that definitely is super important. So the outlook for the short term is quite exciting and daunting almost, because there's a lot to do in a short time frame. The pandemic isn't going to go away magically in the next 2 or 3 months. We are still going to rely on all sorts of stuff. We're not just working from home, but we're living from home. We want to go online for fun. We need to go online for groceries, e-health, like I said, accessing the government, and all of that can only be done with a good technology around me being able to prove who I am, identity proofing.
So in terms of business, your vision is the digital identity technology is the business, or maybe are the services surrounding, these ecosystems? I mean, the wallets and things like that. Do you think that this is the main part of the business?
Absolutely. I think it's an ecosystem, like I just said. So we are one piece. MyTech is one piece in the technology stack. We are specialized in a very critical piece of bridging the gap between physical and digital. But just with MyTech technology, a bank doesn't have a way to onboard a new client be completely compliant. You need other technology in there as well. And so I do think we're going to see more aggregated models. MyTech used to only do identity document verification. We also today offer biometrics like face. No doubt we'll move into other biometrics. We might add other trust signals. We've got NFC, that's the development on the identity document, but we could have other ways of proving or trying to build the trust stack, if you will, of somebody trying to access services. So I think there's those older structures will start becoming a little bit more fluid, and you'll see an ecosystem emerge based on the pipelines and the governments, the governance of what the governments put out there, and then on the technology on top of that, like us, to lay the puzzle, and no doubt people on there to make that usable and logical from a business sense in specific verticals.
Okay, so yeah, it's really interesting. I've been taking a lot of notes of your idea. So help me to to have some highlights. No, in terms of the first thing we have to talk about technology. The first, let's say, the highlighting here is current solutions are mature, but we need to go further.
Yeah,
that's it in terms of technology. Yeah.
Yeah.
About regulation, you mentioned that authorities need to normalize some current usage of the technology, okay? But in terms of digital identity, what do you think is the highlight in terms of regulation?
I think the fact that the regulators are also caring about digital identity and putting in place things like GDPR, which needs revising, but it's definitely putting a stick in the ground and saying we need to look after personal data. And you can see that it's moving and the pace is picking up. So
Okay.
regulators, governments are trying to figure out how they can meet these requirements as quickly as they can.
Okay, so finally, in terms of business, you mentioned that the importance of creating the ecosystem, like in other digital business, but in this case, it's about creating this ecosystem, create trust. Um, that's the most important thing in terms of business for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So we need to bring back trust in the system. It's difficult for businesses to determine who I am easily and not and cost effectively. But there's also this idea of people becoming a little bit weary and a bit fearful of technology. So there's work there to do as well. So from a business perspective, I think that's absolutely key. Adopt the technology, take a layered approach, so you don't just rely on one type of technology, but take different types of technology and make the journey for the customer, because you need to put them first, as smooth as possible, and make sure that you communicate in such a way to the end user, to the consumer, you or me, what you're doing with the data, so that we build the trust in the system back to where we need it to be.
Okay, that's very interesting. Now we have time, 5 minutes, maybe more, for a quick round of questions and answers. I have two questions, and maybe I can add another question. Santi Casas, who is a member of the Hub, Santi is working also in a very interesting project in Spain about also digital identity. Santi is asking, what do you think about new models of decentralized identities, SSI, self-sovereign identities, as a standard for solving the missing identity layer on the digital wall?
Yeah, it's absolutely interesting. Thank you for asking the question. Um, there are a couple of buts. The number one for me is that I'm not so sure that the average person out in the street who doesn't work in digital worlds, who doesn't think about their identity all the time, is going to want to and is able to manage their own identity, even if we give them the tooling. So completely decentralized identity in that sense, I'm not so sure that'll happen immediately. Potentially far out we'll get there, but there'll be some steps in between. With the fundamental, coming back to the fundamental observation of the fact that trust is key in this sense as well. So trusting a sort of an app sitting on my phone with all my credentials in versus trusting maybe my bank to look after my identity, like my bank is looking after my money today. And that's why I think from a technology point of view, decentralized, and I know this is a segue into blockchain carried information, yes, and having easy way of transporting that information, yes. I think the key element here is not so much the way we do, but what we do. We want to be able to limit the information that we're sharing, verified credentials, only for the necessary interaction authorization that I'm giving. And if decentralized and localized on the blockchain is the answer to that, then I think we should do that. I'm not so sure that will happen on short term. I hope that answers the question a little bit.
Probably. We have another question from Alvaro Sanchez. How do you see the future of NFC technology in the digital identity verification?
Which technology? Sorry.
NFC.
Oh, NFC, yes. I think it's great. It's an evolution. It's not so much a revolution. It's an evolution. We had to rely on taking an image of an identity document through with a mobile phone by a consumer, and then we need to translate that to do a digital. Now we can read the NFC chip and use the information on there. And it's much harder for the bad guys, at least now, still much harder for the bad guys to tamper the chip and put other information on the chip. So you almost know for sure that the information coming from the chip is reliable, and it's also quicker. So I like it a lot. I think those chips will be in more and more documents, as we can see across Europe, and potentially one day, why not think of a world where that same type of chip just sits in your device immediately? It can be in your mobile phone. Here we go again, self-sovereign. That's the way you could think about it. And then after that, I don't know where the chip will go, but I think the chip and that type of technology, near field communication, makes life much easier for our clients, but also for you and I out there that need to go through these processes.
Okay, we don't have any other questions, so maybe I can ask you a final question, because as we are a legal tech hub, maybe I can ask a question about digital identity and legal tech hub and legal tech. So on one side, we have that one of the keys in the legal sector is identity verification, okay? And on the other side, thanks to legal tech, companies and law firms can offer legal services entirely online. So with your experience, what can we expect in this field? I mean, are we going to see that digital identity technology will reinforce the adoption of technology that the legal sector is currently embracing? Do you think that this is something that is going to happen? I mean, it's a driver. Digital identity is a driver for legal tech.
Yes, I think it will. I think so. There's a couple of things. I think the people, the clients of legal companies will start expecting more digital service. At least the stuff that is mandated, like proving who I am, let's get that out of the way and done easily. And I'd rather also not leave all my identity documents lying around in an office with somebody. If I can do that in my world and then prove who I am, that will definitely make a lot of sense. So that will probably drive some innovation there, like we've seen in the payments world, like we're seeing in the banking world, in the insurance world. I think it'll come to your world as well. The other thing that comes to mind is that I don't think it'll be true for all products. And I don't know all the different products and services your network offers, but the more complex things definitely will require face-to-face interaction and people really being able to tap into the knowledge and the many years of experience that your members have. And for that, identity verification is just one hurdle, and after that all the good stuff really happens. And I'm not so sure that completely digital will always be the best way to do that. Fundamentally, being able to prove who I am remotely and an easy and a reliable way, it just seems to make a lot of sense to me, also for the legal world.
Okay, very interesting. We don't have any other questions, so it's been a pleasure. It has been very interesting for me, and I think it's the same for our attendees to have you in this webinar. I think that maybe we will have another opportunity in the future to discuss about digital identity, which is a question of, it's a recurrent question in the digital industry. So I thank you again for your time, and it's a pleasure.
Well, thank you very much again for having us. If anybody wants to know more about MyTech, I guess they can find them via you, or they jump onto our website, but also reach out to me on LinkedIn if you want to. I'm really curious about more questions, and happy to continue the conversation through that channel as well. So thanks very much, Farhan. It was a pleasure.
Okay, my pleasure. Okay, thank you. Okay, so we have finished this webinar, and we will for you in the next. Okay. Okay. See you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.